Imagine waking up at dawn in a cramped, smoke-filled hut. The straw beneath you is damp, and your stomach aches with hunger. Outside, the manor bell rings, not to signal the start of your day, but to remind you that you don't own your time. You don't own the land you'll spend hours tilling. You don't even fully own yourself. This was the reality for millions across medieval Europe under a system that would shape societies for nearly 1,000 years: feudalism. The year is 842. Charlemagne's once mighty empire lies fractured. Viking longships raid coastal settlements with terrifying regularity, and Moorish armies press against southern borders. Central authority has collapsed. In this dangerous vacuum emerges a radical reorganization of society, one built not on shared citizenship or nationhood, but on deeply personal bonds of obligation between the powerful and the powerless. Feudalism wasn't established through grand declarations or constitutional assemblies. It evolved gradually between the 9th and 15th centuries as a practical response to the chaos following the collapse of the Roman Empire in Western Europe. With no strong central governments to maintain order, protection became the most valuable currency. Those who could provide it gained immense power over those who needed it. The origins of feudalism trace back to late Roman practices like the patricinium, where free peasants surrendered their lands to powerful landowners in exchange for protection. The Germanic tribes that migrated into former Roman territories brought their own traditions of warrior loyalty. When these influences combined with the pressing need for security in an age of invasions, feudalism took root. At its core, feudalism was a system of reciprocal obligations centered around land tenure. At the top stood the king, who theoretically owned all land within his realm. In practice, he granted large estates called fiefs to his most powerful nobles, who became his vassals. In an elaborate ceremony called homage, a vassal would kneel before his lord, place his hands between the lord's hands, and swear an oath of fealty. The lord would then kiss the vassal on both cheeks, sealing a sacred bond that went beyond mere economic transaction. As Bishop Fulbert of Chartres wrote in 1020 to Duke William of Aquitaine, "He who swears fealty to his lord ought always to have these 6 things in memory: what is harmless, safe, honorable, useful, easy, and practicable." Harmless, that is to say that he should not injure his lord in his body. Safe, that he should not injure him by betraying his secrets or the defenses upon which he relies for security. Honorable, that he should not injure him in his justice or in other matters that pertain to his honor. Useful, that he should not injure him in his possessions. Easy and practicable, that good which his lord is able to do easily, he make not difficult, nor that which is practicable he make not impossible to him. In return for this loyalty, the lord provided protection and the right to exploit the fief's resources. These great nobles would then subdivide their lands among lesser nobles, creating a cascade of obligations flowing downward through the social hierarchy. At each level, military service was the primary duty owed upward. A typical knight might be expected to serve his lord 40 days per year in times of conflict, provide counsel when summoned, and contribute to ransoms if the lord was captured in battle. The entire edifice rested on those who actually worked the land, the peasantry. While some remained free smallholders, the majority became serfs, legally bound to the manor where they were born. Unlike slaves, serfs couldn't be bought and sold individually, but they were transferred along with the land they worked. Their status passed to their children, creating a hereditary caste with limited opportunities for advancement. The economic relationship between lords and serfs defined medieval agricultural production. The typical manor was divided into the domain, land directly controlled by the lord, and tenant holdings worked by peasant families. Serfs typically owed their lord 3 categories of obligations: labor services on the domain, often 3 days weekly, payments in kind such as grain, livestock, or handicrafts, and various monopoly fees for using the lord's mill, oven, or wine press. An English manor court record from 1307 documents these burdens with stark clarity. John Moldison holds 1 virgate of land for which he owes to plow 3 acres in winter and 3 in Lent, to reap 3 days in harvest with 2 men, to carry the Lord's grain for 1 day with 1 cart, to give 1 bushel of wheat as church scot, to give 1 hen and 5 eggs at Easter, and to pay 10 shillings yearly at the 4 appointed terms. The life of a serf was one of grinding toil and limited horizons. Peasant families lived in single-room cottages with dirt floors and thatched roofs. Their diet consisted primarily of coarse bread, pottage, a thick vegetable stew, and ale. Meat was rare, perhaps enjoyed only during religious festivals. Medieval agricultural techniques yielded poor harvests, typically returning just 3 or 4 times the seed planted. Bad weather could easily tip this precarious equilibrium toward famine. Yet, within these harsh constraints, peasants developed sophisticated strategies for survival. They maintained strong communal bonds, sharing resources and labor during critical periods like planting and harvest. The open field system, where cultivation was organized communally rather than in isolated farms, provided some protection against localized crop failures. Peasant families diversified their activities through handicrafts, gathering wild foods and raising small livestock. For the medieval nobility, feudalism offered a path to wealth without commerce, which they largely disdained. Their income derived from extracting surplus production from their peasants, not from market participation. This rentier approach to wealth fundamentally shaped the medieval economy and the mentality of its ruling class. War, not enterprise, became the path to advancement for ambitious nobles. The great historian Mark Bloch described this ruling class as a society of warriors for whom fighting was both profession and obsession. If this military elite justified its privileges through the protection it provided, it also perpetuated the violence that made that protection necessary. The private wars between nobles that plagued medieval Europe were not failures of the feudal system, but inherent features of it.
Do you like to dig deeper? Political economy is full of powerful ideas. You're right in the thick of it. Insightful, thought-provoking, expanding every step of the way. From Adam Smith and the rise of capitalism to Marx's bold critique, mercantilism, Keynesian economics, neoliberalism, and more. Or we explore it all, clearly and from every angle. Keep the momentum going. Check the links, dive deeper, and subscribe for more.
The Church, far from standing apart from feudalism, became thoroughly integrated into its structures. Bishops and abbots held lands as vassals and exercised lordship over peasants just as secular nobles did. Monasteries became major landholders through pious donations, often managing their estates with ruthless efficiency. Yet the Church also provided the ideological framework that legitimized the stark inequalities of feudal society. The theory of the 3 orders, articulated by Bishop Adalbero of Laon around 1020, divided society into those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. Each order had its divinely ordained function. The clergy secured salvation, the nobility provided protection, and the peasantry fed everyone. This elegant formulation masked a brutal truth, that feudal society channeled resources upward while distributing burdens downward. While feudalism is often portrayed as a static system, it continuously evolved in response to changing conditions. By the 12th century, growing population, agricultural innovations, and the revival of trade were transforming the European economy. Cash increasingly replaced service obligations. Many lords commuted labor services into money payments, finding it more profitable to hire wage laborers than to rely on reluctant serf labor. The growth of towns created new centers of power outside the feudal hierarchy. Urban merchants and artisans organized into guilds and communes, sometimes purchasing charters of liberties from cash-strapped lords or kings. As trade expanded, A money economy gradually undermined feudal relationships based on personal service and obligations in kind. The devastating Black Death of the mid-14th century accelerated these changes by creating a severe labor shortage. Surviving peasants found themselves in a stronger bargaining position. In England, the Statute of Labourers attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, creating resentments that contributed to the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. When rebel leader Wat Tyler demanded an end to serfdom, he was articulating a new consciousness that challenged feudal assumptions. The revolt was brutally suppressed, but the economic logic driving it proved unstoppable. In Western Europe, serfdom gradually disappeared in the late medieval period, though it persisted longer in Eastern Europe, where the nobility actually imposed a second serfdom to secure labor for export agriculture. Kings gradually centralized power, building state institutions that reduced their dependence on feudal levies. The introduction of gunpowder weapons undermined the military superiority of mounted knights. By the 16th century, feudalism as a coherent system was already fading in Western Europe, though many of its legal forms would persist until the French Revolution and beyond. What can we learn from studying this distant economic system? Feudalism reminds us that economic relationships are always embedded in broader social and political contexts. The lord-peasant relationship wasn't simply economic. It was simultaneously political, military, judicial, and even religious. Power determined who received the fruits of production, not market mechanisms. Feudalism also demonstrates how economic systems create their own justifying ideologies. The medieval nobility didn't see themselves as exploiters, but as protectors fulfilling their divinely ordained role. The Church's teachings about the three orders made inequality seem natural and necessary. Even many peasants accepted their subordinate position as part of God's plan, though this didn't prevent them from resisting excessive demands. Most importantly, feudalism reveals how economic systems that appear eternal to those living within them can eventually collapse. The lords and bishops of the 11th century could hardly imagine a world without feudal obligations. Just as many today struggle to envision alternatives to our current economic arrangements. Yet, feudalism did end, not primarily through violent revolution, but through countless small adaptations that eventually transformed its fundamental character. As we navigate our own period of economic transformation, with automation and artificial intelligence reshaping traditional labor relationships, the study of feudalism offers valuable perspective. It reminds us that all economic systems are human creations, responsive to changing conditions and subject to human agency. The next time you enjoy the freedom to choose your occupation, change your residence, or criticize those in power, freedoms that would have been unimaginable to a medieval serf, remember that these liberties didn't emerge automatically. They were won through centuries of struggle by ordinary people whose names rarely appear in history books, but whose collective actions gradually transformed the world. The feudal order has vanished, yet its legacy remains visible in our landscapes, our institutions, and our social hierarchies. We are all, in some measure, inheritors of this complex past, a past that reminds us how radically different human societies can be and how they inevitably change.
We've got some amazing content coming your way. Subscribe now so you're first in line for fresh insights and all the good stuff you won't want to miss.